everyone. Can you hear me? So we're coming to the close of this today's DST, and I'm really privileged to be here today to be able to speak to two very prominent educators and contributors to the design industry in Singapore. Before we start, I'd just like to say that we really welcome questions that you have, especially questions that you have after hearing the information that you have received today from the various speakers and the various workshops that you've attended. Feel free to ask any questions, even though they might not fall directly in the expertise of our speakers up here. But I think we are open to exploring new things and to generate a discussion. But before we start, I'd like to invite Chew Hwei to share something very close to his heart as DEAC's chairman with us.
DEAC is the Design Education Advisory Committee, and I thought I'll just fly through these slides because we don't have a lot of time. I had to leave more time for the discussion. And so this committee was actually put together way back in 2020, and with a very clear mandate, but really we see ourselves really playing the role of nurturing the next generation of creative thinkers and problem solvers. So it's quite a bold picture that we see in front of us, but we sort of took it on. And really, I think we've been talking about this or touching upon this over the course of today. I won't go through it again. You're talking about technology change, you're talking about the environment and so on and so forth, the really sort of wicked problems that we face with. But I maybe just draw your attention to the rise of Asia here, because I think, as we are going into this new geopolitics situation, actually it provides a lot of opportunity for this part of the world. And I really would encourage us to look at possibilities within the confines of this region as a start, especially the application of creativity. And, sure, we tend to cast our eyes globally, but I really would tend to think that, take a look into how this region is developing into real opportunities, really capturing that moment of the geopolitics that we are seeing. And here, a bit of a context. This is from the World Economic Forum, and I think we recognize this. I've sort of updated this to 2025. Look at all the skills that they have described, which were things that's going to guide us through in the next few years in this world that we are stepping into already in, right? A lot of this actually resonates with what design is, capabilities are, and a lot of what we are exploring today and has been discussing, right? And really, so the committee is really looking at how do we build human capital in response to change. And I think for a country like Singapore, where we are very small, our only resource is human capital, we really have to see how we can maximize it. And we identified that design education, it's going to play that critical role in building skill sets that we think is going to be relevant for the future economy. Right? So that sets the scene for what the committee has to do. Right? So just allow me to give a bit of the context of where we sit, because this is actually quite fundamental in enabling the success of this committee. That it consists of actually three groups of people: the education leaders, Elaine representing one of the IHLs here. So all the IHLs are represented right across here in Singapore. The second group are actually industry leaders, a good cross-section that cuts across all the key disciplines, representing the voice, but also the view from the industry. And more importantly, we also have government agencies represented here as well. So this is the very first time that we have it at a national level, to have these three groups of people, and the DEAC sits smack in the center, right, to really cut across this ecosystem of stakeholders. And talking about stakeholders, these are all the IHLs represented here, and you can see on the industry side, we have also been engaging all the TACs, the trade associations and chambers, because we are fully aware that, in order to talk about how we can shift the needle for design education and then augment the things that we want to improve, right, is that we need to engage all the stakeholders. And that is exactly this picture that you see here. And actually, we have promised ourselves to engage even more stakeholders over the course of the tenure of this committee. So we are on that journey, actually. Right? The North Star, as soon as this committee was put together, actually we have worked together as a team to identify a North Star because we really think that it is important that we are guided, right, as we take our work over the course of the 2 terms that we have been appointed. And I won't go into a lot of details into it, but I think the first one that I really want to point out here is that we really wanted to shape a design education system which really, first of all, should be unique to Singapore. And if it gains global recognition, well and good. But we really want to see how we can define and co-create together with all the stakeholders a form of design education which is really relevant to Singapore. And as you know, Singapore is a nation by design, and I think we can learn so much over the last 50 years of nation building. And how do we extract those philosophies of creative problem solving and apply it, right, in whatever areas that we are in, economically, socially, right, culturally, right? So this North Star were actually converted into recommendations from our term 1. Maybe I'll just focus in a bit on one of the key recommendations, which is a point of vision for our design education. So we boldly put out there, right, what would design education be like in the next 30 years? Sounds crazy, because if you're talking about all the technological changes today, right, well, it's exactly that we want to hold a contrary view to it, that when things shift so fast, it is even more important that we project out there boldly what it would be in the next 30 years, because we reckon that technology is going to change, right? We cannot be led by technology, but we must have a view to it. I won't go into the details of it because I think we could actually be sharing the report out of term 1, but these are the 6 pillars that we think is going to help govern the IHLs as they shape their education. And maybe I just point out, because again, a lot of this, I'm very glad that it was all touched on, almost all were touched on today. And I think, Hans, you did sort of reference this when you created today's session. So thank you for that. And maybe I'll just draw one example here, design as an ally of technology, that we felt so important, right? With the development of technology, and Don has so fluently demonstrated today here, is that, you know, we can look at technology and sort of let it develop, but it needs to land with the user's voice in it. And I think those are the kind of elements that we want to introduce into the design education, such that then it seats itself very well, and it is up to the IHLs to then adopt it and to develop it, so that then we also do not end up with a homogeneous design education offering across all Singapore, but really harnessing the diversity of all the IHLs to offer something quite powerful over the next 30 years. Yeah, maybe I'll just stop at there. And yeah, so there's a bit of an introduction of what DEAC is about. Yeah.
Thank you, Chew Hwei. I mean, we do have some questions really coming in, yeah, but I'd just like to ask Elaine one question, just reflecting on what Chew Hwei has described. Because Elaine, you also sit on as a member in DEAC, and you also lead Temasek Polytechnic. So I was wondering if you could share some of the learnings, and perhaps if you have applied any of these things that DEAC has discussed, especially a point of vision, to designing a school and the curriculum in Temasek Polytechnic.
Okay, thanks for that question, Hans. Actually, so much has been shared today that really resonates very much with what we are doing. I mean, if you just take the point of vision, the first one, design as a life skill, we've heard so much today about encouraging, the adoption of design thinking, and so heartened to see that in Gen Ed schools, a lot is being done already. You would have seen the national design projects outside, something that we were very fortunate to have been a part of. And, back to what Minister said this morning, right, about creativity being for everyone. And truly, I think that is something that we believe too. And if you ask me, we look forward to that time when, everyone will have DT foundations for problem solving, correct? And I think for our designers, we're preparing them for a world in a way of unknowns, which has been talked about a lot as well. But we're also looking forward to a situation where they're going out and they are interacting in teams with people not from design, but who have an awareness of design already. They could be going into companies where design is already built into the processes in the daily ops. And that kind of raises the bar as well, right? It's a new starting point for them as well. And that is what we are preparing our designers for.
Thank you very much. And Chew Hwei, how about you, after experiencing the summit for today, especially reflecting on the work they have done so well with DEAC, painting the North Star for IHL, was there any interesting learnings that you took away from today?
Well, I think like Elaine, I think the minister really gave a very good start to it. I mean, it is almost like music to our ears, right? When he said that design should be a life skill, and he articulated it very well. Graduated from the very first batch of design school here in Singapore more than 30 years ago, I never in my wildest dream, right, this can happen. We talk about design education as a summit, because at the time when I enrolled into design, I've got questions from my relatives to say, hey, what are you doing? It's like, what is it that you've enrolled into, right? So I think that's fantastic. That's just really to see how it has evolved. The other thing, of course, is that the diversity of what the speakers brought in today here and the depth of the discussion also shows the development of design and its evolution beyond design into a wider discussion of creativity. And I think that's very important, because the DEAC's mandate actually only covers the IHLs. But all the members firmly believe that that is not good enough, right? And we did our own scope creep, and we extended it into the general education, right? And that's why we are very happy for that prototype of the National Design Project, NDP, right? Just to attract also the attention, because NDP sounds like National Day Parade. But we boldly put out there to say, you know what, I think we should do something with the primary school and the secondary school students as well. And I think Elaine with Temasek Poly and Pan and Chi Huang, and it's exactly such prototypes that you are throwing out there. Hopefully that this will be a repeatable activity. So that's also very encouraging as well. The other thing, the whole discussion about what design's role is with technology. Again, I point to Dawn's example, also sharing from overseas speakers. And I think you also prompted a very good question today in your opening, Hans. You were saying that creativity is rather ill-defined. And I love that, because, you know what, maybe we should not even try to define creativity and just keep having this dialogue going on year after year. And I think that will provide the richness of our understanding, that we are not tying it ourselves down into a conversation where design is about a particular discipline. Yes, there are professionals who will conduct work as a designer, but I think more importantly, today's conversation allow us to discuss design as a capability and permeating upstream into a creativity conversation, right? And that's why maybe, if I may just call out a couple of slides, just to bring out a wider conversation. I just want to share this because I think in the context of today's summit, right, and knowing the demographics of the audience here, is that we wanted to share what would be the paradox of learning and solving. Typically, I think, when we sort of were growing up, it started as a child, right? It's the sort of the journey of learning is what you see here. You started with play. You start with play as a kid, right? And then you explore. And then as you go to school, you are start to be thrown with tools, right? And methods. And then rules creep in. KPIs when you start to go to work in organizations, right? And then you are sort of you're trapped or not trapped. You are sort of locked into the organization with a certain governance or culture, right? And then you gain experience. So you probably see where this is going through, right? You are learning, but in a way which is actually converging, right? Starting from a very wide and flexible mind, right? But guess what? And I think, in terms of the problems that we need to solve, and honestly, right, our life is about problem solving, day in, day out, right? Whether at work or when you're going home, right? Whether you're successful in life or at work is about problems, how well you solve your problems. And this is exactly this sort of corresponding that, as a kid, when you're very young, you've got very little problems to solve, right? Your only role is to eat and cry and sleep, right? And then as you grow, you picked up the scale of problems that you need to solve basically grows. The complexity, the fuzziness, including the number of stakeholders that you need to work with. And that's where the paradox is that this sort of contrasting convergence, right, of your learning journey, but actually the problems that you need to solve actually diverge, right? So this is more of a schematic way of looking at it, and it's also how the committee sort of uses as an underpinning approach as we talk about how do we then use creativity and the capability of creative problem solving, right? Especially in education, of course. Yeah, maybe I just stop there and so to see whether it triggers anything or not, because the next thing that we also talked about in the committee is not just on the cognitive side of about what design or creative problem solving is, but we also talked a lot about the whole behavioral traits of what creativity is, and I also hope that to use this opportunity to have a wider conversation, right, to understand what creativity is. Yeah.
And shall we do have a question from the audience, and I think this question I think would be lovely if Elaine can answer as well, since we're on the topic of creativity. The question here is, do you feel creativity should be its own standalone subject, or should we sprinkle a bit in other subjects?
Hans, you started this morning by saying that creativity is applied imagination, right? And just looking at the projects outside, you know that imagination knows no bounds. And by extension of that, I think creativity knows no bounds as well. So I don't think that it should be a standalone subject in that sense. Creativity can be applied in everything. I mean, we're a design school. We've been around for 33 years. And we've been producing graduates in design for the past 33 years. And I think we see that creativity is applied to everything we do. It's not just in what we teach. It's in our day-to-day. It's in our processes. It's in the way we design the students' experience as well. And in that sense, we're literally a creativity on steroids, it's in everything that we do.
Absolutely, I think because when creativity is a standalone, then it translates itself into a discipline, right, or a profession, right? Designer, right? You can be a creative. I mean, although you mentioned that artistic is not creativity, but I mean, if the extreme form of creativity would be an artist, right? Right? And then if you apply it to the economic platform, then you are a designer. But then on the other hand, indeed, you could also sprinkle it, right? Someone described it like salt, actually. You can sprinkle it so that it really it brings out the taste of whatever you sprinkle on it, right? But it should not be thought of as a garnish, by the way, right? It's a sprinkle, right? It should be worked into the dish. And I think, it should be all rather than an and. So, yeah.
Thanks. Love your analogy of salt, because salt brings out the flavor of its original ingredients most of the time, especially meat, but garnishes, sometimes you really don't need it, right?
That's right, yeah.
We've got a very specific question, actually, and this question points to maker spaces in school. And the question is, is maker space a must for all schools now? If yes, what do you think are the guidelines or the central ideas schools should follow by? And maybe this is quite a relevant question for Elaine as well.
Wow, I should ask my colleagues that question, actually. Well, I guess for us, we take that for granted because we're a design school. We've got makerspace all over. But I see that gaining traction. And I think it was just a few days ago, right, that someone approached us to ask us to help them to design their makerspace as well, based on our experience. So I guess, if it can be a place where people go to tinker, to try out different kind of, technologies, this whole thing about making and craft to some extent, I think it is something that certainly can help to generate that creative, aspiration that schools could possibly be wanting to have going forward. Yeah. Guidelines? Not sure, actually. But really, this whole idea about play, and I think I do want to talk about, or rather center on two things. Felix coming on just before us was great because throughout the day I was thinking to myself, there's a lot of talk about play, but where's that talk about failure? Because I think, in fact, one of the first things we always do when we meet parents is we tell them we're going to teach your children to fail, all right? And that kind of gets them to sit up, right? Because it's really it's a mindset shift, right? Away from the fact that failure is a dead end, the notion that failure, or rather the notion that the first idea, for example, is the only idea or the best idea, right? I mean, in teaching design, I think that's something very, very important. We want them to get past that, our students, I'm referring to our students. So I think failure is a very necessary step, and perhaps as a breeding ground for innovation and experimentation. So this is what we need to inculcate right at the start. And of course, play. And again, play is where experimentation takes place. And it is through play that we also allow for failure, right? I think earlier on you said that you want to build, how to build that into school. We have this thing called productive failure. And my colleagues will be able to actually walk you through, if anybody is interested, as to how we go about, designing failure into the learning process. Yeah.
I mean, the makerspace is really interesting when you couple with the idea of failure, because as much as we think that a makerspace is often a place to experiment, build things, a makerspace is also guided by safety guidelines. And safety guidelines and experimentation doesn't necessarily go hand in hand, but I think it's about thinking about how to build a space environment and I would say rules to be able to enable students to experiment as much as learning how to keep themselves safe and being responsible while experimenting. And maybe this is not such a good example, but when I was in school in Singapore, when I was in a workshop, the workshop technicians often scold me about safety. You should not do this, you should not do that. In a workshop, safety is the most important thing, and I agree now. At the same time, when I was doing a master in the Netherlands, the workshop technicians would come to me in the first briefing of safety, and they would tell us, we are here to help you experiment. Do whatever you want. We'll keep you safe and teach you how to be safe while doing it. I think that is a fantastic reframing of how we can help students experiment in maker spaces. But safety is still really important.
No, I agree. I mean, it's whether is it physical safety or psychological safety, you have to ensure that. Right? I mean, in the playground, you'll never hear a kid, I fail, I mean, that doesn't happen, right? So, and I think the thing is also maybe to normalize it. Sometimes we tend to sort of like box places, right? Oh, this is a place that you can fail. This is a place you cannot fail. I know it's not easy, but, if we can normalize those environments, that would be really good. So, a makerspace should be like a canteen in your school, it should be part of the specification of every school from now onwards.
And I just want to jump a little bit more about what you shared, Cheaw Hwei, about the DEAC's North Star, because we know that DEAC is formed primarily of IHL. I'm really curious, especially in the context of this summit, where we have a lot of teachers from the general education space. So how can you help the general education teachers here appreciate what could be useful for them as teachers, leading students, in terms of what you have established for DEAC? I think the question is two ways. How can they learn from what you have found and gathered? Second thing is, because their students in general education, these students will eventually move to IHL. So how can the teachers support the students in moving smoothly in IHL in the context of what we just discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of the whole committee. Of course, like I said, half of them are IHL's leaders, and Elaine, of course, feel free to chime in. But I think one of the key things is that we realize if you're talking about design education, right, you have a student coming in at 16, 17, maybe 18 years old, right, and then you throw them into this big topic of design. right? And then suddenly they are liberated in a way, right? But actually it's because over the past 10 years, right, they have been in a rather sort of formalized learning. And I think that is really quite tough for the kids, and even tougher on the schools as well, because they need to cram in everything for 4 years. And, well, to add fuel to the fire, the industry, and I can speak on behalf because I'm guilty of it as well, is that we start to demand, right, when a graduate leaves the university, you must be able to do this, and this. Okay? Right. And it's not possible, right? We're trying to solve that with a better relation, by really pulling the industry and the IHLs together, and that is really one of the key, I would say, outcome of the committee, right? That's one part of it. And in relation to the general education, and that's why we have been advocating, if we can extend our scope to the secondary and primary school, is that, you guys would be in a very good position to prepare that. And we are not saying that every kid will end up to be a designer, but if we do start with that whole opening up of the minds right from the very primary school, then that will be a much more natural progression, right, as they step into IHL. And again, it's not just about stepping into IHL design courses, but as in that paradox that you see, right? It's not to converge them so fast, right? It is to keep diverging them, right, as much as possible, so that then there is an opportunity for them to be a bit more open, right, with what they need to pick up. Yeah. I think that's one of the key takeaways that we have as a committee.
Thank you. Time is up for this fireside chat. But if you have any last words for the audience, Elaine or Chew Hwei, before we end.
I do.
Okay.
Maybe I'll let Elaine go first.
Okay. I think in response to that is the thought that we should strengthen that nexus between Gen Ed and Design Ed, right? This was why the DEAC to some extent has been set up, where you have the industry and you have the IHLs coming together. I think this is something that Gen Ed can tap into by partnering with us. Yeah. Because we have that access, right? So, for example, with the projects that we have seen today, how might we help to take it further? Providing, already the projects have offered mentorships to the students, but perhaps we can help them to take it to the next level. Perhaps we can offer them internships with us, to come and work within our centers of excellence, and really give them a feel of what it is like. It is really that notion of what we like to talk about, school in work and work in school, which is what we're trying to foster for our own students. And perhaps this is something that we can also offer, to Gen Ed if you send your students along or seek out some partnership together with us.
Thank you, Elaine.
No, I just want to trigger with my last slide. Actually, I have a whole lot of slides, which I think, if I just call it my last slide, because I really want to use this opportunity to sort of reframe a bit, right, in what we talk about today. I want to cover all this, fine, but, I think in the spirit of what we talked about, that design not just as a discipline, but also as a creative problem-solving capability, right? I was just thinking, right, as a kid, I've always been asked by my parent, right, what do you want to be? Maybe we've been asking the wrong question, actually. Already, maybe we should reframe a new way of asking our kids, right? It's not so much about what you want to be, but what do you want to do? Because I think when you ask your kid, what do you want to do, it opens a wider opportunity. And allow me to finish off with one example, right? Is that if the kid says, what do you want to be? And he says, well, I want to be a doctor, for example, right? Cliche, right? Great. But if you ask what do you want to do, I want to save life. Suddenly your possibilities open. You can be a fireman, you can be a nurse, you can be anything that saves lives, right? Any profession that saves lives would open up. So it's also about how we ask the question, and I just want to leave you all with this. Yeah.
Thank you, Chew Hwei, and thank you, Elaine.